Good evening and welcome back to Whispers at Night. Tonight, we delve into the eerie mysteries hidden within America's smallest towns, sharing 10 unsettling true horror stories that have been meticulously documented. These chilling tales come from census workers, pharmacists, teachers, and ordinary individuals who found themselves immersed in communities where reality seems distorted beyond reason. From population counts at midnight that never seem to add up in West Virginia to prescriptions for illnesses unknown in Kansas, each story reveals a baffling nightmare that defies explanation. These are not folklore or fireside stories, but genuine encounters experienced by real people whose lives were forever changed by what they witnessed in these overlooked places. Every account has been carefully verified using official records, employment information, and multiple eyewitness reports, uncovering a disturbing side of small-town America where the impossible quietly unfolds. If you're new here, be sure to subscribe to Whispers at Night for daily true horror stories that challenge everything you thought you knew about the world. Hit the notification bell so you won't miss when we reveal the secrets lurking just beneath the surface. Now, prepare to enter the quiet towns off the beaten path, where friendly smiles mask chilling terrors few dare to speak of. When pharmacist Marisol Vega first drove into Fairview, Nebraska, she felt the same tug of unease that had been gnawing at her since the job offer arrived in her inbox. It wasn't just the generous salary or the relocation package that had seemed too good to be true. It was the sense, deep in her gut, that she was being lured into something she didn't fully understand. For a single mother raising 2 teenagers, the offer had been impossible to turn down. After nearly a decade of working 12-hour shifts for a national chain in Omaha, filling endless prescriptions under buzzing fluorescent lights, she had dreamed of a quieter life. The town of Fairview promised exactly that. Just over 2,000 residents, one main street with century-old brick storefronts, and a pharmacy that had stood proudly on the corner since 1953. The ad had described it as a community anchor, a place where families had come for generations to trust their health to a familiar face. The familiar face, until recently, had been Dr. Leonard Price, who had run the store for more than 30 years before abruptly retiring due to health concerns. Marisol had heard that part of the story twice, once from the hiring manager at the regional office and again in the welcoming email signed by the town's only physician, Dr. Henry Wallace. Both times the words had carried the weight of something carefully rehearsed. The drive from Omaha to Fairview took 3 hours. The farther she got from the interstate, the more the landscape opened around her, seas of corn and wheat swaying in the September wind. By the time she passed the weathered wooden sign that read, "Welcome to Fairview, founded 1881, the sun was hanging low, turning the fields to molten gold." The pharmacy looked almost picturesque with its arched windows and faded lettering. Price Pharmacy, established 1953. But when he stepped inside that first morning, the picture cracked. Dr. Price himself was waiting. He was thin, his frame swallowed by a wrinkled suit jacket, his hands trembling faintly as he passed her the keys. His eyes, a watery gray, avoided hers. "Simple place," he muttered, leading her through narrow aisles stocked with bandages, cough syrup, and dusty bottles of vitamins. "Nothing complicated. Most prescriptions come from Dr. Wallace over at the clinic. Been here 20 years, knows what folks need." The computer system was ancient, its monitor flickering with the green glow of a bygone era. But the inventory was neatly arranged, cataloged in a way that showed decades of habit. And yet, as Marisol glanced over the shelves, something stopped her cold. Nearly half the storage space was taken up by a single drug, industrial-sized bottles stamped with the name Neuroseptin. She counted at least 50 of them, each filled with thousands of identical white tablets. Dr. Price caught her staring, his lips pulled into something that wasn't quite a smile. "We go through a lot of that one," he said, voice flat. "Most common prescription in town. Dr. Wallace writes it for just about everyone. Marisol nodded, though the name stirred no recognition. In 8 years of pharmacy work, she had never dispensed Neuroseptin. Price shoved a thick binder into her hands, a ledger of patient records and prescription histories. "Everything you need is in there," he said briskly, and before she could ask another question, he was gone, slipping out the door without a handshake, without even a backward glance. That first day passed in a blur of introductions. Customers trickled in like clockwork, each one greeting her politely, each one asking for their refills of Neuroseptin in eerily similar tones. The ledger confirmed it. Over 90% of Fairview's adult population was on the drug, all prescribed by Dr. Wallace, all at nearly identical dosages. The supposed diagnosis was printed neatly on every script. Chronic cognitive resistance syndrome. Marisol had never heard of it, not once, not in pharmacy school, not in any professional journal. When Dr. Wallace himself arrived that afternoon, he seemed every inch the small-town doctor, confident, composed, with the kind of easy manner that reassured nervous patients. His hair was steel gray at the temples, his hands steady as he signed off on a stack of prescriptions. "Dr. Price spoke highly of you," he said, glancing at her resume. "Your experience will serve this community well. Fairview has unique needs." Marisol hesitated, then asked, "I couldn't help noticing how often Neuroseptin is prescribed. I'm not familiar with chronic cognitive resistance syndrome." For the briefest moment, his eyes flickered, something calculating beneath the calm. Then he smiled smoothly. "It's rare, appears mostly in isolated rural populations. The symptoms are subtle: difficulty adapting to change, resistance to new information, rigid patterns of thought. Left untreated, it can cause severe social dysfunction." "And Neuroseptin treats it?" she pressed. "Remarkably well," Wallace said. "The improvement in community cohesion has been extraordinary. I'll send you some literature." But that night, when Marisol sat at her kitchen table with her laptop, combing through medical databases, she found nothing. No published studies, no entries in the physician's desk reference, no manufacturer by the name printed on the bottle labels. It was as though Neuroseptin didn't exist outside of Fairview. Days turned into weeks, and the unease only deepened. The town itself functioned with an almost mechanical precision. Customers came at the same hours, spoke in the same clipped cadences, even smiled with the same practiced ease. No one complained of side effects. No one asked about alternatives. It was as if individuality itself had been shaved away. The only people who broke the pattern were air outsiders, seasonal farmhands, a few new families who had yet to settle in. They asked questions, they cracked jokes. Their voices carried a vibrancy that stood in stark contrast to the glazed serenity of everyone else. And, without fail, within months, those outsiders either moved away or fell in line, picking up their first bottles of Neuroseptin. By late September, Marisol's curiosity had hardened into dread. She brought home a sample bottle, cracked open a tablet, and tested it with the pharmacy's old chemical kit. The result chilled her. There were no active pharmaceutical compounds. Instead, the tablets were laced with a synthetic protein she couldn't identify and trace amounts of heavy metals. It was not medicine. It was something else. That Friday evening, when Wallace came in to review prescriptions, she locked the door behind him. Her hands shook as she held up her findings. "I need answers, doctor. This drug, this so-called syndrome, it doesn't exist. Neuroseptin contains no recognized compounds. What are you giving these people?" Wallace studied her in silence, then set his clipboard aside. His shoulders sagged with something like resignation. "How much of the medication have you handled since you arrived?" he asked softly. The question made her throat tighten. "Every day. I dispense it constantly." "Why does that matter?" "Because it's absorbed through the skin," he said. "You've been exposed for weeks. Not enough to reach full therapeutic levels, but enough that withdrawal would be unpleasant." Marisol felt the blood drain from her face. "What do you saying?" Wallace leaned against the counter, his voice low. "Fairview is part of a controlled social program. Neuroceptin reduces resistance to consensus. It makes people cooperative, accepting of structure. Imagine a society without crime, without unrest, without division. That's what we've built. Here." "That's not medicine," Marisol whispered. "That's control." He spread his hands. "Call it what you like. Look around. Children play safely in the streets. Neighbors help each other without question. This is the most harmonious community in the state. We've eliminated conflict at the root." Her stomach twisted. "What about people who refuse?" His expression darkened. "There are always a few. They find life difficult. Most choose to leave. Those who stay, well, the system has ways of correcting imbalance." Marisol understood then why Dr. Price had retired so suddenly, why his hands had trembled as he passed her the keys. He had asked too many questions, and if she stopped dispensing the drug, if she tried to fight this, she would suffer the same fate. That night, she sat alone in her apartment above the pharmacy, staring out at the quiet town below. From her window, she could see the families strolling together, the tidy houses with their porch lights glowing, the children laughing in the dusk. It was exactly as Wallace had promised. Peaceful, orderly, serene. But it was a peace built on chains no one could see. By Monday, she had made her decision. She donned gloves whenever she handled the tablets, carefully limiting her exposure. She smiled at customers, handed out their bottles, and kept meticulous notes in a private journal. Dates, dosages, behavioral observations. If she was trapped inside this experiment, then she would document everything. And the deeper she dug, the more horrifying the truth became. Fairview was not alone. Through subtle hints in Wallace's conversations and by tracing shipping invoices buried in the pharmacy's files, she uncovered references to other towns, quiet communities in Nebraska, Iowa, Missouri, each supplied by the same shadowy distributor, each lulled into the same chemical obedience. She realized then that she was not just a pharmacist. She was a witness. And someday, when the opportunity came, she would be a whistleblower. For now, she plays her part. She dispenses the tablets. She listens as townsfolk thank her with identical smiles, their voices warm but empty. She nods. She records. She waits. Every prescription she fills is another brick in the prison that binds Fairview. But it is also another piece of evidence in the case she is quietly building, day by day, bottle by bottle. And as she turns the key in the pharmacy door each night, the same thought echoes through her mind. They believe they have chosen harmony, but really, they have surrendered freedom. And she alone carries the terrible knowledge that their peace is nothing more than chemical obedience, measured out one prescription at a time. The drive out to Black Ridge took nearly 6 hours from Denver. Honestly, if it hadn't been for my friend Jake's obsession with abandoned places, I never would have made the trip. I was 24, fresh out of college with a journalism degree I wasn't using, working nights bartending at a dive downtown while trying to figure out what to do with my life. Jake, on the other hand, had been building a modest following for his urban exploration YouTube channel, maybe 8,000 subscribers at the time, and he'd been obsessively researching Black Ridge for months. He dug through the Colorado Historical Society archives, piecing together fragments of a town that boomed and then vanished in 1978. Officially, the story was simple. A series of cave-ins made the copper mines too dangerous. Insurance companies pulled out, and without the mine, the town died. But Jake had uncovered old newspaper clippings, small mentions of families leaving in the middle of the night, of the mining company buying up properties at inflated prices. Something about the way the town had emptied didn't sit right with him, and eventually, he convinced me to come see for myself. We arrived mid-afternoon on a crisp October Saturday. The valley was sharp with autumn chill, and Black Ridge sat tucked between two mountains, The dirt road wound back and forth down the mountainside, each switchback bringing us closer to a town that looked like it had been frozen in time. About 40 buildings in total, most wooden and single-story, roofs caving in, windows smashed or boarded with warped plywood. Main Street was wide and empty, lined with derelict storefronts. The silence hit first, not the peaceful quiet of nature, but a heavy, pressing stillness, as though the mountains themselves were holding their breath. Jake parked near the old general store, Morrison's Goods and Supplies, and we grabbed our backpacks, flashlights, and camera gear. The first oddity was the church at the end of Main Street. Unlike the other structures, it was intact. The paint peeled, the steps rotted, but the windows were whole, the brass doorknob gleaming faintly. Jake wanted to film it first. As we approached, he noticed fresh tire tracks in the dirt, maybe a day old. That should have been the first warning, but he brushed it off, talking about previous explorers leaving marks, maybe graffiti inside. The church door was locked, not with some rusty antique padlock, but a modern, heavy-duty master lock. Inside the windows, black fabric blocked any view. When Jake peeked through a small gap, he recoiled immediately. The air inside smelled strange, chemicals, like industrial cleaners or something used in mortuaries. We decided to check the mining company office instead. A 2-story brick building near the edge of town, Ridgeline Copper Corporation, carved above the entrance. The front door was gone completely, leaving only a dark, empty frame. Jake went in first, flashlight in hand. I followed close behind with my phone light. The first floor was exactly what you'd expect in a long-abandoned office. Overturned desks, scattered papers, emptied filing cabinets. But then we found one cabinet that was different, locked with a new heavy-duty padlock, just like the church. Jake had bolt cutters in his truck. It was standard gear for urban explorers. After debating for 15 minutes, curiosity won. Inside were dozens of manila folders. They weren't mining records. They were payments, checks made out to Black Ridge families in September and October 1978, amounts ranging from $30,000 to $50,000. Each folder contained agreements about relocation and confidentiality. Some had handwritten notes. Husband refused initial offer. See Incident Report 7B. Or, family relocated after consultation with security team. The thickest folder at the back, labeled Tunnel 4 Incident Confidential, changed everything. Inside were black and white photos of a collapsed mine entrance. In one image, partially covered by rubble, you could make out a torn piece of flannel sticking out. Medical examiner reports listed 11 miners in Tunnel 4, but only 7 deaths were reported publicly. The other 4 were quietly resolved with payouts totaling $200,000. Jake paled. He insisted we needed to copy everything. That's when we heard it. A low diesel engine rumble cutting through the silence like a knife. We ducked near a window. Outside, an old Ford F-250 parked behind Jake's truck. 2 men got out, both in their 60s, identical brown Carhartt jackets and baseball caps. The larger one, built like a linebacker gone to seed, had a shotgun slung casually across his chest. The smaller man, thin with a long gray beard, carried what looked like a gas can. Carl, the bigger one, spoke first, pointing at the building. "We know you're in there. Just want to talk about what you're doing on private property." Jake grabbed my arm. We crept toward the back, only to find another truck blocking our escape. Footsteps sounded on the front porch. Slow, deliberate. The thin man's voice floated through the broken windows. "My grandfather worked Tunnel 4. Made good money for the family before the accident. Shame when outsiders stir up old grief. You understand?" We crouched behind filing cabinets, sweating despite the cold. Jake turned off his camera, clutching it like a weapon. Then Jake did something I'll never forget. He stood, hands raised, calm and steady. "Hey guys, just taking photos for a college project on ghost towns. Didn't mean to trespass. We'll leave now." Carl's eyes, pale blue and unsettling, studied him. The thin man took the camera, scrolled through footage, then dropped it and stomped it underfoot. Carl's voice dropped. "This town isn't abandoned. It's protected. The Brennans, the Washburns. We stayed after Black Ridge closed. The mining company paid for our silence. Our families prospered, and we're not letting kids with cameras ruin it." The thin man grabbed my shoulder, yanking me next to Jake. Carl raised the shotgun, not pointed directly but close enough. "You're going to drive out. Forget this place. Delete anything you copied. If we see you again, remember, old tunnels collapse. People fall. Never found." Outside, the thin man moved toward a woman near the church. She looked confused but not yet terrified. Carl kept watch over us as we climbed into the truck. He rifled through Jake's pockets, taking his driver's license. "Stay quiet. You'll get it back in a month. Talk, and I know where you live." Jake started the truck, hands shaking. As we descended the switchbacks, I glanced back. The thin man was guiding the woman toward the office, hand on her elbow. We never spoke about it afterward. Jake vomited on the side of the highway. Exactly 1 month later, Jake's license arrived in the mail, no return address. Black Ridge disappeared from our minds, though sometimes I still Google it. No missing hiker reports, no news about that woman, but I can't shake the feeling. Someone, somewhere is still keeping that town's secrets, quietly, carefully, for generations. The Harpers had been on the road for nearly 12 hours by the time they saw the green sign that read, "Welcome to Ashford Hollow, Vermont, Eston 1791. The 2-lane highway curled down through a wooded valley, red and gold leaves falling in slow spirals onto the windshield. Beyond the trees, a cluster of church steeples and old brick buildings peeked from the mist, the kind of postcard-perfect New England town that seemed untouched by time. Robert Harper tightened his grip on the wheel. This trip had been his idea, one he'd been planning since his daughter was shortlisted for the interview. His 17-year-old Emily had earned a shot at Ashford Hollow College, a small liberal arts school famous in the Northeast for its environmental science program. The invitation had felt like a miracle. The tuition offer almost too generous to be real. He wanted everything about this weekend to go smoothly. In the passenger seat, Emily flipped through a folder of papers, her pen scratching quick notes. Her mother, Diane, stirred awake in the back seat, brushing travel hair from her eyes. She'd driven most of the night through New York, her stubbornness giving Robert a chance to rest before the final leg. "Almost there," Robert said, his voice pitched with quiet relief. "Good," Diane yawned, "because I don't think I can stand another gas station coffee." Emily barely looked up, her focus locked on the neat stack of application materials she had reviewed a dozen times already. "They said the interview is at 10 tomorrow morning. That gives me tonight to rehearse." "That's the plan," Robert said, glancing at the dashboard clock. "We'll get checked into the inn, have a nice dinner, maybe walk the campus. No stress." But when they rolled down Main Street, past tidy brick storefronts, iron lampposts, and banners with the college crest snapping in the breeze, the plan began to fray. The Ashford Hollow Inn stood at the corner across from the town green, its clapboard siding painted a crisp white, window boxes bursting with late autumn mums. A hand-painted sign swung gently from wrought iron brackets. Robert parked out front, stretching his stiff shoulders before ushering his family inside. The inn smelled of polished wood and cinnamon. A woman behind the desk, silver hair tied in a neat bun, pearls at her neck, smiled warmly as though she'd been expecting them all her life. "You must be the Harper family," she said, her New England lilt warm and precise. "I'm Martha Klein. Welcome to Ashford Hollow. We've been waiting for you." Robert returned the smile, relieved. "Yes, Reservations for 2 nights. My daughter Emily has her interview at the college tomorrow. Martha's pen paused mid-signature. She lifted her gaze, brows knitting faintly. Tomorrow? She said gently, as if correcting a child. No, dear. The school board meets tonight. Emily's presentation is scheduled for 7 sharp. Emily blinked, startled. Presentation? I think there's some mistake. I have an interview tomorrow morning with the admissions committee. That's what the email said. Martha turned to the calendar pinned on the wall behind her desk, tapping a manicured finger against the square marked with bold red ink. Today is Saturday, October 19th. The board has been very excited to hear Emily's ideas. Robert pulled out his phone, his thumb jabbing at the screen. Tuesday, October 15th. Clear as daylight. He held it out. See? It's Tuesday. We left Boston on Sunday. We've been driving for 2 days, not 5. But Martha only looked at him with patient pity. The mountains play tricks on travelers, she said, sliding a brass key across the counter. Get yourselves settled. Speak to Dr. Alden at the college if you're still uncertain. He'll ear it up. Upstairs, the room was cozy, with quilts folded neatly at the foot of the beds and a view of the campus rising on the hill across the creek. But the warmth of the place only seemed to heighten the chill crawling up Robert's spine. This is insane, Diane muttered, pulling out her tablet. Every device says it's Tuesday, but everyone here is dead set. It's Saturday. Not just Saturday, Emily whispered. She held up the inn's welcome packet, which contained a printed program with her name typed in bold. Special guest speaker, Emily Harper. A vision for environmental futures. Robert stared at the program, his pulse hammering. How the hell did they? His phone buzzed. The caller ID read, Ashford Hollow College. He answered on instinct. Mr. Harper? A woman's voice said, warm, professional. This is Clara from the admissions office. We're thrilled to have Emily here for tonight's board meeting. The entire community's looking forward to her talk. Robert's mouth went dry. Excuse me, but there's a misunderstanding. My daughter didn't prepare any. Oh, Mr. Harper, Clara interrupted gently. Of course she did. It was part of her application. She specifically requested the chance to address the board. Tonight at 7. What day is it? Robert demanded. There was the faintest pause. Why Saturday, October 19th? Is something wrong with your calendar? He hung up, his hand trembling. The devices in the room, his phone, Diane's tablet, Emily's laptop, all agreed on the date, Tuesday the 15th. Yet every living soul in Ashford Hollow spoke with the calm certainty of Saturday the 19th. By late afternoon, the Harpers ventured out onto Main Street, hoping to find clarity. Instead, they found only more dissonance. Shops posted Saturday hours. Church bells rang as if calling for a weekend service. Locals greeted them with cheer, each one seeming to know Emily's name, her supposed topic, even details of a presentation she had never written. A grocer asked if she'd be addressing sustainable agriculture. A bookstore owner mentioned solar panel grants. A woman outside the post office said her son was excited to join the recycling initiative Emily would propose. Emily clutched Robert's arm, her face pale. Dad, how do they know all this? I never. He squeezed her hand. We'll get through this. Just one meeting. We'll figure out what's going on after. At 6:45, they found themselves walking toward the high school gymnasium where the meeting was to be held. The building glowed warmly against the darkening sky, its windows filled with the silhouettes of townsfolk. They hadn't wanted to come, but it felt impossible not to, as though some unseen current was pulling them along. Inside, the gym buzzed with anticipation. Rows of folding chairs filled with residents, all smiling, all expectant. The school board sat at a long table on the stage, and at the center was a tall, silver-haired man in a dark suit. His presence radiated quiet authority. "Emily Harper," the chairwoman announced, her voice ringing clear. "Ashford Hollow welcomes you. Please, share with us your vision." Emily rose before she realized what she was doing. Her legs carried her to the podium, her hands opening the folder she had packed with ordinary notes and essays. Yet when she began to speak, the words were not ones she consciously formed. "I believe," she heard herself say, her voice steady, "that sustainability begins with unity of purpose." And then the rest poured out, fluent, detailed, persuasive. She spoke of solar energy, organic farming, water conservation, recycling systems. She wove data into her arguments, cited studies she hadn't read, offered proposals she'd never drafted. The audience leaned forward, nodding, clapping softly at key points. Robert and Diane exchanged helpless glances in the front row. Emily's voice carried for 20 minutes, confident and commanding, until she concluded with a call for collective stewardship. The gym erupted in a standing ovation. Dr. Alden, the silver-haired man, approached, his handshake firm and warm. "Brilliant work, Emily. Exactly the kind of leadership Ashford Hollow values. You'll be a fine addition to our program. Orientation begins Monday." Emily recoiled. "Wait, I haven't accepted admission. I came for an interview." Alden's brow furrowed in polite confusion. "But you just did, publicly, before the board. Your parents signed the enrollment forms this afternoon." He handed Robert a folder. Inside were official documents bearing his and Diane's signatures. Signatures they did not remember writing, dated Saturday, October 19th. The Harpers returned to the inn in stunned silence. Their devices still insisted it was Tuesday the 15th, but their credit card statements showed charges for meals they hadn't eaten and hotel nights they hadn't stayed. Their return flights had been rescheduled for the following week. Confirmation emails sitting in Diane's inbox, though she had no memory of them. Over the next 3 days, which the Harpers experienced as Wednesday through Friday, but the town insisted were Sunday through Tuesday, they found themselves absorbed deeper into Ashford Hollow's rhythm. Emily attended orientation sessions, dorm assignments discussed as though she'd been a student for months. Robert and Diane were ushered into parent activities, community projects, volunteer rosters. Each night, they swore they'd leave in the morning, and each morning, they found themselves still there, swept along by expectations spoken with such certainty that resistance felt impossible. Even their own memories began to blur. Events they swore hadn't happened appeared in photos on their phones. Conversations they didn't recall replayed in their minds as if they had always been real. By the week's end, the Harpers returned to Boston. According to the world outside Ashford Hollow, they had been gone exactly as long as the town said. Not the shorter trip they remembered. Friends congratulated them on Emily's early acceptance. Relatives mentioned the news articles about her presentation that none of them had seen written. Emily began classes at Ashford Hollow College the next month. She excelled, graduating with honors, but she never again spoke of the strangeness of that first visit. Diane and Robert told friends only that the town had been charming. Yet in quiet moments, they would confess to each other the unsettling truth. They had lost something in that valley. Time, memory, choice. Something they could never recover. And Ashford Hollow still waits for new families. Always ready, always certain, always on Saturday. The call about Uncle Howard's estate came on a Thursday afternoon in early September, the kind of call that changes everything without warning. I was 32, scraping by paycheck to paycheck, repairing computers in a cramped shop in Philadelphia. When the lawyer said I'd inherited everything, my first thought was, who the hell is this guy again? Howard Beaumont wasn't close family. He was my mother's older brother, a man who'd cut ties with everyone about 15 years ago after some argument nobody ever explained. Mom had passed 5 years earlier, so when Fredrickson, the lawyer with the gravely deliberate voice, said Howard had no other living relatives, that made me the default beneficiary. The Victorian house sat in Stillwater, a tiny town of maybe 800 people tucked into the hills of northern Pennsylvania, roughly 4 hours from Philadelphia. I'd never been there, never heard Howard mention the place before he disappeared from our lives entirely. Fredrickson told me Howard had been found dead in his study, apparently of a heart attack, surrounded by boxes of old newspapers and what looked like research materials. It was a strange, vague explanation that made my curiosity spike more than grief. I left at dawn that Saturday, hoping to beat the traffic. GPS routed me through winding mountain roads that narrowed the closer I got to Stillwater. By the time I switched to the last cracked 2-lane road, I felt as if I were being funneled into another era, one no longer connected to the modern world. The town itself looked like it had been forgotten on purpose. Main Street's buildings were half boarded up. A diner had 3 pickup trucks parked outside, engines off but radiators still warm from earlier. The gas station attendant stared at me like I'd grown a second head when I asked for Howard Beaumont. No recognition, just suspicion and silence. The Victorian house signed, toed at the edge of town, up a gravel drive lined with overgrown hedges that clawed at my car as I drove past. It was massive, 3 stories of gray-painted wood peeling in wide strips, with a wraparound porch sagging in spots. Windows reflected the afternoon sun like blank, unblinking eyes. The key was exactly where Fredrickson said it would be, tucked under a stone frog by the front steps. I hesitated before pushing the heavy oak door open. The smell hit immediately. Dust, old paper, and something chemical, sharp enough to make my nostrils sting. The study was the first room to greet me. As Fredrickson had described, it was a cross between a library and a detective's evidence room. Every wall was covered in corkboards, each layered with newspaper clippings, photographs, and handwritten notes connected by multicolored strings. Red for disappearances, blue for property records, green for something labeled society activities in Howard's cramped handwriting. A massive oak desk dominated the center of the room, buried under stacks of yellowed documents and leather-bound journals. I picked up the nearest journal, dated just 3 weeks before Howard died. The first entry made my blood run cold. They know I'm getting close. Found another pipe in the basement wall today behind the wine rack. Same diameter as the others. Whatever they're moving through this house, they needed a network for it. I set the journal down, moving closer to the corkboards. The disappearances went back decades, the earliest from 1978, a traveling salesman whose car was found abandoned near the property, a hitchhiker in 1983, a runaway teenager in 1991, a homeless veteran in 2006, all vanished within a mile of the Victorian. Howard had marked each one with a red pin on a hand-drawn map of Stillwater, forming a rough circle around the house. The photographs unsettled me even more. Black and white shots from the 1950s showed groups of men in suits standing in front of the house, faces serious, purposeful. Names written in fading ink identified them as the Stillwater Preservation Committee, 1953 on. Some surnames match businesses still operating in town, the Brennan Hardware Store, Garrison Diner. These weren't just historical photos, they were a direct lineage of people still running the town. I spent hours poring over Howard's research. Slowly, a horrifying picture emerged. The Preservation Committee wasn't about keeping the town's history intact. They were guarding their own secrets. Howard had traced property records showing the Victorian had been purchased by the committee in 1952, but rotated through individual members' names to avoid scrutiny. According to Howard's surveillance notes, the committee still met here monthly. He had documented license plates, arrival times, even snippets of conversation via a bug planted near the back entrance. One transcript chilled me. The new infrastructure is almost complete. 3 more months and we can resume operations at full capacity. That was just 6 weeks old. This wasn't paranoia. Howard had evidence. Receipts, photographs, documentation proving something organized and deliberate was happening right under the town's nose. I needed to see the basement. The door in the kitchen was painted shut under so many layers that it took a knife and a lot of force to pry it open. The wooden steps groaned under my weight, the chemical smell growing stronger with each step. The basement was huge, running the full length of the house. Stone walls wept moisture. The concrete floor looked surprisingly new. Chalk marks and measurements covered the walls. In the far corner, the wine rack Howard had mentioned was pulled aside, revealing an 8-inch diameter pipe running horizontally into the wall, branching off like veins. The smell inside was concentrated, almost medical, like walking down a hospital corridor at 3 a.m. Fresh scratches trailed from the pipe to a recently installed drain in the center of the room. My heart was pounding when I heard the front door open above me. Not a gentle creak, but the confident push of someone who owned the place. Footsteps followed, heavy, deliberate, spreading through the house. I killed my phone flashlight and hid behind the furnace. A woman's voice carried clearly. "Check every room. Make sure he didn't leave anything new. The nephew's car is here. He's probably asking questions." A man replied. "Garrison already called. Kid stopped at the diner an hour ago, showing Howard's photo around." They had been watching me since I arrived. The woman spoke again. "Good. We'll have maybe 20 minutes before he comes back. Get the remaining documents from the study and check if Howard found the secondary hub in the attic." Secondary hub. There was more. My mind raced as I crept back to the stairs. Through a crack, I counted at least 4 people, moving like they owned the place. Howard's notes had been precise. These were members of the committee still maintaining their control. One voice was familiar. The diner cook who had served me coffee earlier. My phone buzzed violently in my pocket. An unknown number. "Mr. Beaumont, this is Fredrickson. Call immediately. Urgent info about your uncle's estate." I had to switch it off. Whoever was upstairs had my number. Howard had another exit mapped out, an old coal chute hidden behind a metal shelf stacked with paint cans. I moved toward it, but the moment I touched the shelf, a can tumbled, crashing to the floor. Footsteps stopped. "Did you hear that?" The woman's voice. "He's in the basement. Thompson, Garrison, block the exits. Brennan, with me." I abandoned stealth, shoved the shelf aside and dove into the chute. A narrow, rusted metal tunnel angled toward daylight. Flashlights swept the basement behind me. Halfway up, I wedged tight, scraping my shoulders against the sides. Someone shouted, "He's in the chute!" I twisted and pulled until I burst into daylight, coughing black dust. Thick woods bordered the yard. I ran blindly, branches clawing at me, following a faint deer trail. Car doors slammed and engines roared in the distance. They had to circle back to reach me. I had maybe 5 minutes. Howard had been meticulous. He'd hidden copies of his research at multiple cache sites on the property. One was under a distinctive rock formation, a quarter-mile into the woods, marked by 3 white blazes on a massive oak. I found a waterproof container with flash drives, photocopies, and a prepaid phone. The contact was listed as insurance. I called immediately. A young woman answered. "Mr. Howard, thank God." I cut her off. "Howard's dead. I have his research. They're after me." Listen carefully. I'm Agent Diane Russo with the DEA. Howard was building a case against the Stillwater Preservation Committee. Those pipes, distribution for synthetic fentanyl. Basement, attic, and pipe networks were used to move product undetected. The disappearances Howard tracked, people who threatened the operation. We're 40 minutes out with a tactical team. Can you stay hidden? She directed me to an abandoned ranger station 2 miles north. The basement was reinforced. I barricaded myself, listening to dogs tracking my scent. 37 minutes later, Sirens and helicopter rotors cut through the woods. Agents swarmed the house and surrounding properties. Committee members were arrested with wiles, weapons and evidence Howard had documented. Russo found me after an hour. Howard had contacted them 6 months prior, systematically building the case. His heart attack might have been natural, or it might not. 3 other properties used for distribution were seized. 23 arrests, including the mayor and police chief, exposed the committee's decades-long control over the town. I gave testimony, handed over Howard's research, and never returned. The government seized the Victorian house, and my inheritance, mostly savings and insurance, was enough to start over. Sometimes I think about the missing people Howard tracked. Russo said they excavated parts of the property but wouldn't tell me what they found. Some questions are better left unasked, and some secrets Howard had realized too late were worth risking your life to uncover. The first thing people whispered about Granville Hollow was always the same. Don't stay past dark. Outsiders laughed when they heard it, chalking it up to small-town superstition, the kind of folklore mountain people clung to. But the locals didn't laugh. They never laughed. They simply fell silent, eyes hardening, voices lowering, and if pressed for an explanation, they would change the subject altogether. According to the U.S. Census Bureau, Granville Hollow, West Virginia, had a population of 847 souls. That number had never changed, not in 10 years, not in 50. Yet among the few who had done the counting, the federal workers who drove into the valley every decade, there were whispers of a different truth. They claimed that after midnight, the hollow gave up its secrets, and 353 more people appeared. Daniel Harker had no time for ghost stories. For 12 years he had worked for the Census Bureau, walking neighborhoods, knocking on doors, cataloging the quiet details of ordinary lives. He was a man of order and numbers, not rumor, and Daniel took pride in being thorough. When his supervisor assigned him to Granville Hollow in March of 2020, noting that the area had a history of irregularities, Daniel smiled politely, tucked the file under his arm, and assured them he would sort it out. The drive from Charleston took 4 hours. The further he went, the narrower the roads became, asphalt bending into mist and forest, vanishing over ridges into nameless hollows. Creeks came out of nowhere, glimmering silver in his headlights before ducking under old bridges that didn't appear on any map. By the time he descended into the valley, the sun was already bleeding orange behind the ridgeline, shadows stretching long and thin across the single road that cut through town. Granville Hollow was smaller than he expected. Maybe 50 homes, scattered along cracked pavement, a clapboard church guarding the far end with its sharp white steeple, and at the center a hand-painted sign that read, Calhoun's Mercantile. Daniel pulled his government-issued sedan in front of the store, stepped out, and stretched his stiff legs. The air was damp with wood smoke and earth, heavy with the scent of rotting leaves, as though the valley itself had been holding its breath for years. A handful of townsfolk were shutting up shop for the night. They nodded when they saw him, polite enough, but their eyes lingered too long. Daniel recognized the look. Small communities were always suspicious of government men. Inside the mercantile, the warmth of a pot-bellied stove washed over him. The place smelled of kerosene, dried beans, and tobacco. Shelves sagged under jars of preserves, bags of feed, boxes of shells. 3 old men sat close to the stove, moving checkers with the patience of men who had nowhere else to be. Behind the counter stood a wiry man in his 60s, face carved by sun and years, eyes sharp but not unfriendly. "Census man, ain't ya?" he asked when Daniel introduced himself. His voice was gravelly, softened by tobacco. Daniel showed him his badge. "Daniel Harker. I'll be in town a few days." The storekeeper nodded slowly. "Walter Calhoun. Folks here keep to themselves, but they'll answer your questions. Just don't wander too far up the ridges at night." His eyes flicked toward the men at the stove. They did not look up from their board, but something unspoken seemed to pass between them. One of the checker players, thin as a rail with a beard gone white, finally spoke. "Widow Lancaster rents a room above the pharmacy. Tell her Elias sent you." His voice was steady, but his pale eyes lingered on Daniel in a way that made him feel like prey being measured. Daniel thanked them and made his way down the street. The pharmacy's windows were dust-choked, its signs faded, but light glowed from the upstairs. Widow Lancaster welcomed him warmly, apron tied neat, silver hair pinned back. She showed him a narrow room with a bed, a desk, and a view of the church at the end of the street. "You'll find folks polite enough," she said, pressing the key into his hand. "But we keep early hours here. Doors shut by 9. Daniel smiled politely, though her words nagged at him. Doors shut by 9. He sat at the desk that evening, spreading maps and records across the surface. The history was plain. Granville Hollow had been founded in the 1880s as a logging town. The industry was gone, yet the census records had remained eerily consistent. Always 847. Never higher, never lower. Towns didn't work that way. Populations shifted. People died or moved. Young people left. New ones arrived. But not here. Granville Hollow was frozen, caught in a loop. The next morning, he began his count. He started on the main road, knocking on doors, asking his questions. Families answered politely but briefly. They gave names, ages, occupations, all with a precision that unsettled him. No one said, around 40 or about 10 years. Everyone knew exactly. The day passed in a rhythm Daniel knew well. One house after another, numbers stacking neatly on his clipboard. By nightfall, he had tallied 127 people in 43 homes. The second day carried him into the ridges. The terrain grew rougher, houses tucked deep in the woods. He found elderly couples in sagging cabins, families who had lived in the same structures for generations. They treated him with the same distant politeness. Yet whenever he asked about neighbors, their answers were exact, precise, almost rehearsed. Every head was accounted for. By the end of the third day, he had his number, 847. Exactly as the record showed. Daniel felt a quiet satisfaction. Whatever stories his supervisor had heard, they ended here. Granville Hollow was peculiar, yes, but his work was clean, exact. Tomorrow he would double-check, then file his report. That evening, Walter Calhoun served him a plate of pot roast at the Mercantile. The checker game was still going, the men hunched in their usual places. Walter poured Daniel a cup of coffee and asked if he was finished. 847, Daniel said. Consistent, decade after decade. Remarkably steady for a town this size. Walter's eyes shifted to the men at the stove. Again, something passed between them. Elias, the white-bearded one, spoke without looking up from his board. Might take another walk tonight, son. Sometimes folks show themselves after dark. Daniel almost laughed, but the man's tone was flat, matter-of-fact. He thought about it as he walked back to his room. Maybe there were night workers he had missed. Maybe there were cabins tucked deep in the trees he had overlooked. He prided himself on thoroughness. He would not leave stones unturned. At 10 o'clock he set out again, flashlight in hand, clipboard under his arm. The moon was near full, throwing silver across the valley. Most houses glowed softly with lamplight, curtains drawn, families settling in. Nothing unusual, until he reached the far end near the church. There, on a dirt lane he swore he had walked earlier, stood a house he had never seen. 2 stories, yellow siding, smoke curling from its chimney, warm light in its windows. The mailbox read, Patterson. Confused, Daniel knocked. A middle-aged woman with gray-streaked hair opened the door, smiling politely as though she expected him. Margaret Patterson. She invited him inside, introduced her husband Robe, Art, and their teenage son, Daniel. They answered his questions with perfect clarity, dates, ages, occupations, all precise. They claimed they had lived in the house 15 years. As Daniel rose to leave, the boy followed him to the porch. His voice was low, urgent. You should keep walking tonight, Mr. Harker. There are more of us than you counted. And there were. For the next 3 hours, Daniel walked the valley and found house after house he could swear had not existed before. Families greeted him like they had been expecting his knock. Every household complete, with mailboxes, porches, and histories that stretched back generations. He filled page after page until, by 2 in the morning, his tally had reached 1,200, 847 by day, plus 353 by night. Exhausted and shaken, he stumbled back to Widow Lancaster's room. Sleep did not come easily. His mind churned with questions that had no answers. By morning, the Pattersons' lane was gone. Where the house had stood, weeds choked an empty lot. The mailbox had vanished, the driveway dissolved into undergrowth. He spent the entire day searching for the homes he had marked in the night. Every one of them gone. Even the dirt tracks themselves had disappeared, as if swallowed whole by the earth. That evening he confronted Walter Calhoun at the Mercantile, slamming his papers on the counter, demanding answers. Walter studied him for a long while, then sighed, his shoulders sinking as though carrying a burden too heavy to name. "How many years you been at this job, son?" 12, Daniel said. "I've never seen anything like this." Walter nodded. "And you never will again. Granville Hollow's different. Always has been." Elias lifted his pale eyes from the checkerboard. "The count always comes out the same, don't it? 847 by day, 353 by night, 1,200 in all." Daniel's mouth went dry. "How do you know the exact numbers?" "Because it's always the same," Elias said. "Every 10 years, the census comes. Every 10 years he counts us, day folk and night folk. We live here, same as each other, just at different times." "That's impossible," Daniel whispered. "Houses don't vanish. People don't appear only after dark." Walter's face softened with something like pity. "File your report. Put down what makes sense to your government, but don't go digging for answers. You don't want to understand it, son. Understanding it means you belong to it." Daniel left the Hollow the next morning. He filed the official report, 847 souls. He said nothing of the other 353, nothing of the vanished homes. He told himself it was fatigue, stress, tricks of the mind. But the notes in his own hand betrayed him. He knew what he had seen. 3 months later, an envelope arrived at the bureau, no return address. Inside was a single sheet of paper, written in neat, careful handwriting. "Thank you for not reporting all of us." It was signed, simply, Daniel Patterson. Daniel Harker locked the letter away and never spoke of Granville Hollow again. Yet every decade when the new census numbers came in, he checked, always the same, 847, the official truth. But he knew better. He knew that somewhere in the mist between the ridges, when midnight came, the Hollow stirred and the missing souls returned. A place caught between two realities. A place that could not be explained by numbers, only endured by those bound to it. And every 10 years, the Hollow waited for another census man to walk its roads, to meet its people, to learn its secret. 847 by day, 353 by night, always the same. 4 months ago, I inherited a diner from my great-aunt Dolores, someone I'd only met twice in my life. I was sitting in my cramped Chicago apartment on a Wednesday afternoon, scrolling through job listings after yet another failed interview, when the lawyer called. His voice was calm, formal, but carried an undertone of urgency. Dolores had left me her business in Gravelton, Iowa, a town so small it barely registered on GPS. I laughed at first, thinking it was some scam, but the paperwork was legitimate, notarized and signed, complete with a list of inventory and assets. The Blue Moon Diner had been established in 1952. It came with all the equipment, recipes, and a small apartment above the restaurant. After 6 months of unemployment and dwindling savings, I figured, why not? The worst that could happen was I'd fail, return to the city, and have a story to tell. Packing my Honda Accord with the little I owned, I left Chicago at dawn, anxious but strangely excited. Gravelton was exactly the kind of town I'd imagined from the movies. Main Street was literally the main street, lined with brick buildings that hadn't changed since the 1960s. A weathered wooden sign at the town limits claimed a population of 847. The Blue Moon sat at the heart of downtown, snug between a barber shop with a faded striped pole and an antique store that looked permanently closed. When I first walked in, keys jingling in my hand, the smell hit me immediately. Old grease, lemon cleaner, and that unmistakable diner aroma that lingers in your hair and clothing for days. Within minutes, the locals started showing up. Mrs. Holloway from the post office brought me a casserole. Tom from the gas station offered to fix the broken neon sign above the diner. A dozen others trickled in, curious and warm, introducing themselves, patting my shoulder, insisting I call if I needed anything. Their friendliness was overwhelming, almost aggressively so. Each of them praised the reopening, expressed relief the diner was back, as if they'd been waiting decades. But there was something in their eyes that unsettled me. Not hostility, not malice, but a careful watchfulness, an almost imperceptible scrutiny that made me feel like an outsider in my own inheritance. The first week blurred into exhausting days of cleaning and organizing. Aunt Dolores had been meticulous. Inventory lists dating back decades were filed neatly. Suppliers documented in cursive so perfect it could have belonged in a museum. In the office sat a metal lockbox I couldn't open. The key wasn't with the others Fredrickson had given me. Her recipe collection was in a filing cabinet. Each card was handwritten, yellowed with age, carefully laminated in plastic sleeves. There was something uncanny about the measurements. Exact, not approximated. Not a pinch of salt, but 3/8 teaspoon precisely. Not seasoned to taste, but precise quantities of every spice. Mrs. Holloway came by every morning for her coffee, always sitting at the counter, always ordering the same thing. She watched me work with sharp blue eyes, sometimes offering advice on suppliers or customer preferences. Her gaze always lingered, and I caught myself wondering if she was merely observant or guarding something. By the second week, I had breakfast and lunch running smoothly. The town was hungry for the Blue Moon's return. The daily specials, meatloaf Mondays, chicken pot pie Wednesdays, and the legendary Blue Moon chili on Fridays, drew locals and neighboring farmers alike. George, the hardware store owner, told me the chili recipe had been unchanged for 70 years. People drove hours just for a bowl. Following Dolores's cards meticulously, the praise was constant. Tastes just like Dolores used to make, they'd say. Or, haven't I had this since the diner closed? For the first time in months, I thought maybe this inheritance was a blessing. That illusion shattered the day I found the newspaper clippings. I was cleaning the basement storage room, trying to make space for new supplies, when I knocked over a box of old promotional materials. Behind it, wrapped in plastic, were several Gravelton Gazette articles from 1987. Mystery illness strikes 5 at Blue Moon Diner. Police investigate possible poisoning at local restaurant. Blue Moon temporarily closed as death toll rises to 3. I sank to the cold concrete floor, the words blurring as the story hit me. 3 people had died after eating the Friday special, the chili. 2 more were hospitalized for weeks. Police investigated for months but never found evidence of intentional poisoning. The health department cleared the diner, attributing the deaths to contaminated ingredients. One small article made my stomach turn. Only certain customers had been affected. Newcomers, travelers, people who ate alone at the counter. The photos of the victims were haunting. A traveling salesman from Nebraska, a young woman en route to Minneapolis, and an elderly man who'd just moved to Gravelton to be near his daughter. Strangers, all dead within days. The ingredients had been tested extensively, nothing toxic found. Yet somehow, 3 people had died. I thought of the meals I'd served in the past 2 weeks, all prepared exactly as Dolores's cards instructed, and felt bile rise in my throat. That night, I couldn't cook. I feigned illness, closing early. Mrs. Holloway lingered, concern etched into her weathered face. After the diner emptied, I returned to the office and tried everything to open the lockbox: paper clips, screwdrivers, even a hammer from the maintenance closet. Around midnight, I found a small key taped under Dolores's desk drawer. Inside were 2 sets of recipe cards, identical except for tiny differences. The chili recipe in the filing cabinet. Binet called for Hungarian paprika from the Morrison family farm. The lockbox version used regular paprika. Meatloaf breadcrumbs differed. Every recipe had subtle variations. At the bottom of the locked set was a note in Dolores's handwriting: "For strangers passing through." The realization hit like ice. 2 sets of recipes, one for locals, one for outsiders. I scoured the archives, diving into old forums and memorial pages. One, dedicated to Janet Bauer, confirmed my suspicion. Janet had been driving through town, sat alone at the counter, and died 4 days later from an unusual reaction. In her photos, Mrs. Holloway sat in her usual spot, eating the same chili without issue. The difference was clear. 3 ingredients, paprika, a specific cumin, and prairie sage, were used in the local recipes but omitted for outsiders. Friday morning, I opened the diner, my mind racing. Breakfast came and went, the locals chatting happily. At 11 o'clock, I began preparing the chili using the safe recipe from the filing cabinet. Mrs. Holloway arrived, watching my hands move, her eyes sharp and assessing. "Dolores always said the secret was in the details," she said, her tone casual. She knew every family in this town, where they grew their herbs, which farms had the best spices. It's what made this place special. Then a man I'd never seen entered, California plates on his car outside. He sat at the counter where Janet Bauer had sat decades ago and asked for a recommendation. Mrs. Holloway, without hesitation, steered him toward the chili. I ladled the safe version into a bowl. He ate, smiled, and left alive. Immediately afterward, the diner's atmosphere shifted. Mrs. Holloway left silently, followed by the other locals. I was alone, the empty booths echoing the sound of my heartbeat. On the counter, a note appeared in careful cursive. Dolores understood her responsibility, GER. Avilton takes care of its own. That night, I packed everything. The lockbox with the stranger recipes tucked securely. I drove out of Gravelton at dawn, passing the population sign one last time, understanding what the clippings had left unsaid. This wasn't malice, it was preservation. Over decades, the town had developed immunity to certain local herbs and plants, but outsiders were vulnerable. The Blue Moon Diner was the filter, ensuring Gravelton remained unchanged, protecting itself from anyone who didn't belong. I drove straight to Chicago, never stopping at diners again, filing a report with the FBI that probably went nowhere. The Blue Moon remains closed now, waiting for the next distant relative, someone who might finally understand Gravelton's quiet, deadly traditions. After nearly a year of unemployment, Marcus Ellery finally found a promising position at the only facility in Coldridge, Vermont, a small mill town perched on the edge of the Green Mountains. The job offered exceptional pay, full benefits, and a schedule that matched his night owl tendencies. There was only one rule: never look outside during your shift. Marcus had been out of work for 11 months when the listing appeared on a state employment board. It was simple and to the point. Overnight assembly technician needed for specialized manufacturing facility. Training provided, no prior experience required, starting wage $40 per hour, full benefits after 90 days. For someone who had spent months scraping together savings and rationing groceries, it seemed almost unreal. The phone interview was conducted by a woman named Claudia Hart, the human resources coordinator. She was precise, professional, and detached. Her questions were straightforward: availability, willingness to follow strict procedures, and the ability to handle repetitive tasks without supervision. When Marcus asked about the nature of the work, her answers were vague but calming. "We produce highly specialized components for federal clients," she said. "Nothing dangerous, but it requires exact adherence to instructions. The overnight shift runs 11 p.m. to 7 a.m. Sunday through Thursday. You will have Fridays and Saturdays off." Marcus accepted immediately, driving 5 hours from Burlington to Coldridge the following week. The town was smaller than he had imagined. Roughly 250 residents, clustered around a single street with a diner, a general store, and a post office that also functioned as a gas station. The facility itself rose on a slight hill at the edge of town, a single-story building with industrial fencing topped with barbed wire and floodlights that glared down onto an asphalt perimeter. Claudia Hart met him at the main entrance on his first night. She was tall, thin, with her gray-streaked hair pulled back into a tight bun, her eyes cool and scrutinizing. "Welcome to Coldridge Precision," she said, leading him through multiple checkpoints. "Before your orientation, you must understand the safety and security protocols. They are absolute. Do you understand?" Marcus nodded, already sensing a subtle tension beneath her calm exterior. She led him down an immaculate corridor, fluorescent lights reflecting off the polished concrete floors. Each door was numbered, with no other markings. "Your workstation is room 7. You will assemble components according to the manual. Each night, the minimum quota is 250 units. Precision is critical." She handed him a thick binder, black-bound. "Read this entirely before beginning work. There is one rule above all others. Do not look outside during your shift. The windows exist but are covered with blackout panels. Do not remove them. Do not attempt to see the outside world between 11 p.m. and 7 a.m. Marcus's brow furrowed. "Is there a security concern I should be aware of?" "Only that violation endangers both the mission and you personally," she replied, voice steady. "Non-compliance carries immediate consequences, legal and operational." He spent the first shift immersing himself in the work, connecting small, unmarked electronic components into modules, packaging them for shipping to undisclosed locations. The task was repetitive but oddly satisfying. By the end of the night, Claudia inspected his work. "Excellent," she said. "You exceeded expectations. This will continue." The next few weeks passed in mechanical rhythm. Marcus arrived each evening, reviewed the night's procedures, and assembled components with methodical precision. He noticed occasional low rumbles from outside, a distant metallic scrape, or the hum of engines. He told himself it was construction, trucks, or machinery, but the sounds persisted. Occasionally, a voice, muffled, faintly human, would drift through the facility's ventilation. He tried to focus on his work, the rule ringing in his mind: never look outside. By the fourth week, curiosity gnawed at him. The noises grew clearer, almost patterned. One night, around 1 a.m., he heard screams, high-pitched, urgent, muffled by walls but undeniably human. His hands trembled as he held a component, listening as the cries cut off abruptly. Something mechanical hummed, then silence. Marcus's pulse raced. He remembered Claudia's warning: never look outside. But the sounds refused to be ignored. He approached the wall where he assumed windows were hidden behind the panels. Running his fingers along the edges, he found the corner of a blackout sheet loose. With shaking hands, he pried open a small gap. What he saw froze him. The parking lot was alive with armored vehicles, trucks, and men in dark combat uniforms. Floodlights turned the asphalt white, casting long, eerie shadows. Several civilians, bound and controlled by armed personnel, were herded from one truck to another. It was precise, methodical, and terrifyingly efficient. A sense of dread engulfed him. The components he had been assembling for weeks suddenly took on a grim purpose. He sealed the panel and returned to his workstation, heart hammering. The rest of the night was a blur. He completed his quota mechanically, submitting the modules for inspection, while the weight of what he had seen pressed on him. Outside, the hum continued. He noticed a black sedan, parked unobtrusively along the perimeter as he drove home to the rented room above the diner. When he entered, he could see two figures seated inside, watching silently. Over the next several nights, the surveillance intensified. The sedan appeared regularly, following him if he left town for groceries or errands. He discovered blocked internet access, intercepted phone calls, and constant surveillance by unknown individuals. The realization struck. He could not leave, could not communicate, and could not escape. His exposure to the truth about the facility had made him a liability. During his 6th week, Claudia confronted him privately. "Mr. Ellery," she said, standing at the edge of room 7 as he worked, "we need to discuss an incident." He looked up, trying to mask his anxiety. "I've followed all protocols. Production numbers are within standards." "Your work is excellent," she said, "but we detected tampering with the blackout panels. You breached security. Understand this. The components you assemble serve critical national interests. The prohibition on observing outside activity exists to protect everyone involved." Marcus swallowed hard. "I understand." "Good," she said. "Curiosity is natural, especially in intelligent employees, but it can be dangerous here. In recognition of your skill and cooperation, we are offering you increased compensation, housing upgrades, and extended benefits if you commit to the rules for at least 2 years. The envelope she handed him contained a new contract detailing a substantial salary increase, private accommodations, and comprehensive health coverage. Marcus accepted, realizing the unspoken choice: compliance or unseen consequences. Weeks turned into months. Marcus's life became a monotonous rhythm of night work, precise assembly, and careful avoidance of the outside world. The sounds persisted, the hum of machinery, the occasional human cries, but he trained himself to focus entirely on the modules, detaching from reality beyond the walls of room 7. His apartment above the diner offered comfort, but he never left without noticing the shadow of surveillance, the quiet watchfulness of unknown eyes. Derek, or now Marcus, had learned the hard way that some knowledge carries consequences far beyond ordinary understanding. He had become part of a system too vast, too secret, and too meticulously controlled to ever fully comprehend. And he realized, with quiet resignation, that some jobs demand not just skill, but complete submission. The night sounds continued, unchanging. He had learned to ignore them. He focused on his work, the metallic rhythm of assembly as steady as the passing hours. Some workers in Coldridge might have lived ordinary lives, unaware of the machinery that hummed behind closed doors. Marcus knew he was part of something far greater, a cog in a machine whose purpose he might never understand, and from which there was no escape. And in the quiet moments between assembly, he sometimes wondered, if he ever looked outside again, would he see the truth, or something far worse? The drive from Michigan to Arizona had been planned as our big post-college adventure. Me and Kelsey, both 23, loaded down with nothing but time, a beat-up Ford Explorer, and a ridiculous amount of snacks. The car smelled faintly of old upholstery and cheap air freshener, but we didn't care. We had a carefully curated road trip playlist, a cooler with a week's worth of food, and a vague sense of freedom that only comes after graduation. We were 3 days into the trip when Kelsey's eyes lit up at an exit sign in the middle of Missouri. Riverbend. She had read about it in one of her America's Forgotten Towns articles. The write-up gushed about a mill dating back to the 1800s, still housing its original machinery. She practically begged me to take the detour, insisting it would only add an hour to our trip. Looking back, I should have noticed the hesitation in the gas station attendant's eyes 20 miles back when Kelsey mentioned where we were headed. At first glance, Riverbend looked normal. Maybe 500 people, a single main road lined with shops, a diner with a vintage neon sign flickering faintly, and houses neatly spaced along the outskirts. But something was off. For a Saturday afternoon, the streets were nearly empty. The few pedestrians we did see, maybe 3 total, stared at us as though memorizing our license plate. The houses we passed all had their curtains drawn, the glass gleaming in the sun but hiding whatever life existed inside. The mill sat at the far edge of town, massive and brooding, built from weathered red brick. The water wheel had long since stopped turning. "Look at the masonry," Kelsey whispered, practically bouncing in her seat. "This is engineering genius from the 1800s. Faded no trespassing signs lined the perimeter, but the fence was full of gaps. We squeezed through one easily. The moment we entered, the smell hit me. Musty, metallic, like old pennies mixed with rotting wood. Dust swirled in the shafts of light breaking through broken windows. Rusted machinery loomed over us. Graffiti streaked across walls and remnants of forgotten lives littered the floor. Kelsey was photographing everything, her camera clicking with excitement. I wandered toward what looked like an old office in the back corner. The door creaked on its hinges as I pushed it open, revealing overturned filing cabinets and scattered papers, ripped, yellowed, and rotting. Underneath a toppled desk, I spotted a leather wallet, vintage, maybe from the 1970s. Inside was a driver's license for Douglas Hartley from Kansas, expired in 1978, along with $43 in faded bills and family photos of children who, if alive, would now be in their 50s. Kelsey found another wallet behind a filing cabinet, 1983, Oklahoma. Then more. Once we started looking carefully, we discovered dozens. 37 wallets, 11 purses, over 20 loose IDs. Military IDs, student cards, insurance cards. Each told a story of someone passing through, someone who never made it home. And then the car keys. Old Fords, Chevys, rental fobs from companies long gone. Whoever these people were, they hadn't abandoned their belongings. They had vanished. Kelsey's face had gone pale. "We need to call the police," she whispered. I pulled out my phone, realizing immediately there was no signal. Not even emergency calls. Kelsey checked hers. Nothing. It was as if the mill had been cut off from the world entirely. We decided to document everything first, photographing IDs and keys. That's when the sound came. The mill door slammed. Not the wind. Not a gust. The whole building reverberated with a single deliberate slam. Through the broken windows, we saw a chain wrapped around the door handles outside. Footsteps followed, deliberate, slow, circling the building. Male voices, at least 3, discussed our car. One gruff voice said Michigan plates would fetch good money at a chop shop. Another, older, gravelly, commented that waiting until dark made it cleaner. They knew we were inside. Kelsey clutched my arm as we crouched behind a massive, rusted piece of machinery. Their conversation revealed even more. The sheriff was out at his daughter's recital, and the locals were in on it. They were calculating, methodical, and disturbingly calm about their victims. I remembered the loading dock door on the far side of the building. If we could get there undetected, maybe we had a chance. We crawled low, knees scraping the gritty floor, our breathing painfully loud in the silence. Halfway across, we saw a man in coveralls by the old water intake. 50-ish, weathered, holding a rifle casually. Through a broken window, 2 more men stood at different corners. They had us surrounded without effort. Then Kelsey spotted something I'd missed. An old grain chute in the floor, rusted but open. It led downward, probably to the lower level. Desperation outweighed fear. I dropped first, hitting packed dirt mixed with old grain that had turned to powder. The air smelled stale, fetid, and slightly metallic. Kelsey followed. The basement was a maze of collapsed shelving and support pillars. More personal effects littered the floor. Watches, rings, a child's toy bear, faded and dusty. Scratches marred the wooden beams, deep gouges at shoulder height with dark stains around them. These weren't accidents. People had tried to claw their way out. Then we saw it. a drainage pipe, 4 feet in diameter, leading away from the mill toward the river. Corroded but intact. We shined our flashlights down it. It extended beyond our reach. Above, footsteps grew louder. The men had noticed the open grate. Shouts echoed. Angry now instead of casual. We had no choice. The pipe was filthy, full of decades of grime and sediment, but it offered escape. Phones held in our mouths provided dim light. Crawling through, every inch felt endless, echoing our terror. Voices followed, distorted, but the sound of pursuit was unmistakable. Finally, the pipe opened into a concrete junction box near the river, a quarter-mile from the mill. We scrambled out, hands and knees torn, lungs burning. Sunlight painted the sky in orange and red as we ran along the riverbank through the trees, circling back toward our car. Flashlights danced in the distance at the mill, searching. By the time we reached the Explorer, shaking hands fumbled with the keys. The engine turned over on the 3rd try. We didn't slow down. 60 miles per hour through the empty streets of Riverbend, curtains twitching, faces pressed to windows. Nobody pursued. At the gas station 20 miles out, the same attendant nodded when he saw our condition. He didn't ask questions. Lucky, he said. Most people who stop in Riverbend don't leave. We drove straight to Arizona, stopping only for fuel. Kelsey wanted the FBI, the state police, anyone to listen. I convinced her to wait until we were safe. In Phoenix, we reported everything, providing photos of IDs, descriptions of the men, every detail. The FBI agent initially seemed attentive. Then, after a few calls, his demeanor changed. Old mills collect debris. People lose things, he said. You were probably just spooked by some locals pulling a prank. 2 weeks later, our case was closed. Online, every photo we'd taken was corrupted, showing nothing but black screens. Riverbend disappeared from Google Maps. The exit we had taken returned only empty highway on navigation apps, but I know it's still there. That little town, frozen in time, covering its tracks, waiting for the next unsuspecting travelers to slip off the interstate. Curious, wandering, and oblivious to the horror hidden behind the weathered red bricks of Riverbend Mill. Real estate agent Eleanor Hayes had spent nearly 2 decades navigating the competitive Nashville housing market when she received an unusual inquiry about a small town in eastern Tennessee called Willow Ridge. Every property in the town was listed for exactly $1. Every seller cited the same reason for leaving. The welcome committee had made them an offer. Eleanor's curiosity was immediate. She had handled odd listings before, but nothing remotely like this. The caller identified himself as Mayor Leonard Halloway and explained that the town was engaged in a voluntary community transition program. Each homeowner had decided simultaneously to relocate, creating a rare opportunity for newcomers who valued small-town life and close-knit community networks. We are selective about who joins us, Mayor Halloway said during their initial phone conversation. We seek residents who respect tradition, follow community standards, and actively participate in civic life. The Welcome Committee evaluates candidates carefully before approval. Financially, the opportunity was too perfect to be believable. Homes were priced at $1, taxes were minimal, utilities provided at cost, and the Welcome Committee offered comprehensive relocation support, including moving expenses, job placements, and even initial household furnishings. The condition was clear. New residents had to commit to living in Willow Ridge for a minimum of 5 years and adhere to the community's programs. Driving the 2-hour journey from Nashville, Eleanor expected a rural town struggling to attract buyers. Instead, she found a place that looked immaculate. Every home gleamed, lawns were perfectly maintained, streets swept clean, and the streets were shaded by centuries-old oak trees, their leaves a cascade of golden and crimson. The town exuded prosperity and order, eerily flawless. Mayor Halloway greeted Eleanor at the town hall, a stately brick building dominating the central square. He was a man in his early 70s, with silver hair, impeccably tailored clothing, and the polished demeanor of someone born into authority. His office was lined with awards for civic achievement, photographs of town events, and certificates celebrating Willow Ridge's excellence in education, public health, and civic engagement. "Welcome to Willow Ridge," he said, offering Eleanor coffee from a polished silver service set. "I trust your journey was smooth." Eleanor accepted, noting the precision of his movements and the calculated calm in his voice. "The town is remarkable, but I must ask, why is every resident relocating at the same time? It's highly unusual." Mayor Halloway's smile was perfectly measured. "Opportunities arise that require change. Our current residents have been offered new lives elsewhere, and we see this as an opportunity to introduce new energy and perspective to Willow Ridge." He personally escorted her through the town over the next few hours. Approximately 300 homes were displayed for sale, ranging from modest cottages to grand Victorian estates, all pristine. The schools were modern, medical facilities staffed by competent professionals, and the downtown area included every amenity needed for comfortable living. What unnerved Eleanor most were the residents themselves. Each greeted Mayor Halloway warmly, with what appeared to be genuine respect, yet there was an uncanny uniformity in their behavior. When she asked why they were leaving, every family gave a near-identical answer. "The Welcome Committee made us an offer we could not refuse." "The committee is deeply involved in all aspects of town life?" Eleanor asked as they concluded a tour at the community center. "Oh yes," Halloway replied smoothly. "They manage civic activities, volunteer programs, social integration, and even dispute resolution. Every resident is supported and guided throughout their tenure." Eleanor requested to meet members of the Welcome Committee, but Halloway explained they were currently in session and could not be disturbed. He handed her a thick folder containing property descriptions, community bylaws, and detailed guidelines for new residents, emphasizing the importance of compliance with community standards. That evening, Eleanor stayed at a cozy inn run by a couple named the Parkers, who were cheerful yet subtly rehearsed in their answers about leaving Willow Ridge. "The Welcome Committee gave us an opportunity we could not refuse," Mrs. Parker said, almost in unison with her husband. "They arranged for us to relocate to a coastal community where our retirement would be comfortable and without the burden of local responsibilities." When Eleanor pressed for specifics, the Parkers grew vague, polite, and quickly ended the conversation. She spent the night reviewing town maps, property records, and census data. She discovered that every property in Willow Ridge had been purchased over the past 20 years by the Willow Ridge Community Development Corporation, a holding entity whose ultimate ownership was obscured through layers of corporate shells registered in Delaware and the Cayman Islands. The population, she realized, remained remarkably stable. Approximately 800 residents lived there at any given time, yet families came and went quietly, replaced with newcomers seamlessly integrated into the town's routines. Returning to Willow Ridge to continue her property assessments, Eleanor was introduced to families preparing to relocate. The Martinez family was moving to Arizona to work in renewable energy, the Johnsons to Vermont to manage an organic farm, and the Petersons to Oregon to join a forestry initiative. Every move was carefully tailored to the family's skills, desires, and professional ambitions. How did the Welcome Committee know about these opportunities? Eleanor asked Mrs. Martinez. "They have connections everywhere," she said with a smile. "They ensure that each family is placed where they will thrive. It's remarkable." Eleanor requested contact information for relocated families, but Mayor Halloway explained the committee's strict privacy policies. No former resident information could be shared, he said, assuring her that all relocations were carefully coordinated and satisfactory. That evening, Eleanor attended a Welcome Committee meeting at the community center. 50 residents were present, though only 7 individuals actively led proceedings. They were introduced by first names only. Robert, financial planning; Susan, social integration; Michael, professional development; Jennifer, education services; David, infrastructure maintenance; Lisa, conflict resolution; Catherine, external relations. The committee operated with a near-perfect efficiency, evaluating new residents' professional qualifications, financial resources, family structures, and personal compatibility. Background checks and investigations extended far beyond normal standards. Eleanor realized the truth. Joining Willow Ridge meant submitting to a system that would shape every aspect of her life, from job placement to social relationships. Security, prosperity, and community harmony were guaranteed, but at the cost of autonomy. As the meeting concluded, Catherine, coordinator of external relations, approached Eleanor. "We've reviewed your experience," she said warmly. "Your real estate expertise is exactly what Willow Ridge needs. We would like you to join the welcome committee and relocate permanently. Your role would involve coordinating new residents and ensuring smooth transitions." Eleanor felt a chill. The offer was generous. A fully furnished home, stable income, comprehensive benefits, and the security of belonging to the town's structured system. "I need time to consider such a major decision," she replied cautiously. "Of course," Catherine said with a measured smile. "But please understand, anyone with detailed knowledge of our operations must either join the community or sign strict confidentiality agreements with legal consequences for violations." Eleanor realized she had walked too far into Willow Ridge to leave uninvolved. To remain an observer would be impossible. She accepted the position, relocating to a stately Victorian on Maple Street, now fully integrated into the town's routines and hierarchy. Today, Eleanor Hayes coordinates property management for the Willow Ridge Community Development Corporation, guiding new residents through their integration while maintaining the town's meticulously structured order. Her former life in Nashville feels like a distant memory, and she rarely questions the opaque, controlled processes that brought her into the town. Willow Ridge continues to welcome new residents at the symbolic price of $1. In return, they commit fully to the town's values and programs, entering a community where prosperity, harmony, and direction are guaranteed, but personal autonomy is quietly, irrevocably surrendered. The morning I drove into Black Hollow, West Virginia, I was 32, broke, and out of options. My checking account had exactly $800. 2 weeks earlier, the marketing firm where I'd spent 7 years had laid off half their staff, including me. My severance barely covered what I owed on credit cards. A friend from college had texted me about a cabin rental deep in the Appalachian Mountains. Dirt cheap if I paid 3 months up front. $200 a month. The photos showed a simple wooden cabin surrounded by pine trees with a stone fireplace and basic furniture. Perfect for disappearing, figuring out my next move, and pretending the world didn't exist for a while. GPS lost signal about 20 miles before the turnoff. I had to follow handwritten directions, counting mailboxes and searching for a rusted green water tower. The first person I saw was at the only gas station in town. A cramped building with wood paneling that hadn't changed since the 1970s. The attendant, a woman probably in her 60s with gray hair pulled back tightly, watched me pump gas. When I went inside, she studied my face while running my card, then asked if I was heading up to the Garrett place. I nodded. She exchanged a quick, almost imperceptible glance with an older man buying cigarettes. It lasted less than a second but felt loaded. She handed back my card without another word, but the man followed me outside, pretending to check his phone while clearly watching me. His truck had a faded eagle sticker on the back window, arrows clutched in its talons with some illegible text beneath. The cabin sat at the end of a winding dirt road, flanked by dense forest for nearly 3 miles. Every 100 yards or so, I noticed orange paint marks on trees, always 3 diagonal slashes on the right side of the road. Past 2 driveways with heavy chains and handmade no trespassing signs, including one crudely spray-painted, ended with the words, "We don't call 911, and a rifle illustration. The key was hidden under a fake rock near the front door, just as the owner had said, but I noticed fresh tire tracks in the mud that weren't mine. Inside, the cabin smelled like copper pennies mixed with pine cleaner. The furniture looked older than the photos suggested. In the bedroom closet, someone had left a cardboard box filled with military surplus, canvas bags, ammunition boxes, and stacks of photocopied papers. I didn't touch them. Isolation hit hard that first night. I couldn't hear anything except wind through the trees, no cars, planes, or distant neighbors. Around 9 p.m., while reading on the couch, I saw movement outside. Footsteps on the porch, slow and deliberate. Through a gap in the curtains, I saw a man standing with his hands in his pockets, staring at the door. He was maybe 50, wearing work clothes and a baseball cap, utterly still. I didn't move. After 5 minutes, he turned and disappeared into the darkness. No vehicle. He'd walked through the woods to reach the cabin. I pushed a chair against the front door that night, telling myself I was being paranoid. Maybe he was checking on the property for the owner. The next morning, boot prints circled the cabin, stopping under each window, deeper near the bathroom, like someone had lingered there. On the back door, 3 diagonal marks in the dirt matched the orange paint on the trees. I tried calling the owner. Voicemail. At a small diner in town, I ordered coffee at the counter. A young waitress, blonde with tired eyes, leaned close and whispered, "You should leave," then walked away, pretending nothing happened. Her hands trembled when giving change. The cook in the back kept staring, memorizing my face. Driving back to the cabin, a dark blue pickup truck followed, about 50 feet behind. Not the gas station truck. Tinted wind, ABS, engine idling. At the turnoff, I stopped. The truck stopped too, idling silently. 30 seconds passed. I turned back toward the cabin. The truck continued slowly, no more than 10 mph. Back at the cabin, the cardboard box from the closet had been moved to the kitchen table. The papers spread out, meeting minutes from something called the Black Hollow Resistance Committee, dated early 2000s. Discussions of homeland defense and operational security. One page listed names and addresses, with the note in pen, "She's here." Panic hit. I started packing, but my car wouldn't start. Just a click when turning the key. No visible damage, but someone had tampered with it. Without cell service, there was no calling for help. Walking back to town would take hours. I threw clothes into a bag while listening. Vehicles approached, multiple engines, growing louder. 3 trucks parked semicircle around my car. About 8 men got out, all in plain clothes but moving with coordination. One, the man from last night, carried a rifle casually across his chest. They didn't storm the cabin. They just waited. An older man, white beard, sunburned, walked to the porch and knocked politely. "We need to discuss your situation," he said calmly, referencing property I had no right to touch. Through the kitchen window, I saw 2 men positioned near the tree line, covering the back. The bearded man explained that Black Hollow handled its own problems, that Garrett shouldn't have rented to outsiders. He gave me 10 minutes to come out, then leaned against a truck, watching his watch. I remembered a hand-drawn map in the papers, marked with X's and one labeled emergency cache near a creek a quarter-mile behind the cabin. Maybe there was something useful, supplies, a radio, a flare gun. I turned on the faucet and TV to create noise, then locked myself in the bathroom and pried open the window screen. The men focused on the main entrance. The 2 covering the back weren't looking my way. I dropped my bag first, then squeezed through, scraping my ribs on the frame. The woods were the ick. But after 20 feet, I was hidden. Behind me, the bearded man shouted 5 minutes left. His patience was laced with threat. The creek was where the map indicated, shallow and moss-covered. Partially buried under tree roots was a green metal box. Inside, vacuum-sealed cash, $3,000 in small bills, 2 prepaid cell phones in plastic, car keys, and a loaded handgun I didn't touch. A notebook contained names, photos from training exercises, and plans for something called Day Zero. I powered on one phone, 1 bar of service. I called 911, reporting armed men holding me at the Garrett cabin. The dispatcher hesitated, but promised to send help, warning it might take time. She stayed on the line. Shouts erupted from the cabin, breaking glass, They'd discovered I was gone. The bearded man barked orders, no longer friendly, instructing a perimeter sweep. I grabbed cash and one phone, leaving the rest, and moved deeper into the forest. Branches tore at clothes, twigs snapped underfoot, sounding like gunshots. Dogs barked, closing in. These people knew the terrain and had trained animals. I found a hollow under fallen trees, wedged myself inside, covering the opening with leaves. The barking and shouting circled. Radio static carried words about tracks leading toward the creek. 40 minutes felt like hours. Insects crawled over me, but I stayed still. Then sirens, multiple vehicles. The dogs stopped. Flashlights swirled as searchers returned to the cabin. The dispatcher called, confirming my location. I whispered directions. A female officer found me, nervous but armed. She helped me to a cruiser past federal-looking vehicles I hadn't heard arrive. Black Hollow was swarming with law enforcement. The bearded man was in handcuffs. 3 other men detained. Most trucks had fled. The officer explained the group had been monitored for years, but never confronted until I see. Aim forward. Garrett had rented the cabin without consulting them. I had been extremely lucky. I spent 3 days giving statements at motels 2 counties over. The FBI later showed me photos of weapons caches, training sites, and attack plans on federal buildings. I never retrieved my car or belongings. They warned the group would scatter, but would likely reform elsewhere in the mountains. I kept one prepaid phone and the cash, evidence I could legally retain. Sometimes, I check online for Black Hollow news. Nothing ever mentions it. It's as if the whole thing never happened.